when I saw the documentary and I saw how like something that I did affected someone like in such a negative way that made someone feel the opposite of everything that I had ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
It made me refocus on my whole entire career.
This is a special presentation for the Bleav in Pro Wrestling podcast.
Here's Rick Ucchino
on the Bleav Podcast Network.
What is going on, you guys? Rick Ucchino here on the Bleav in Pro Wrestling podcast, and I am not alone today. No, SP3 is not with me. It is a very special edition of the Bleav in Pro Wrestling podcast here. Anybody who has followed the show, watched the show, joined along with the channel in the last few months since we launched knows that I love to talk about two things. Yes, I love to talk about professional wrestling. Duh. But I also love to talk shop. I love to pick the brain of fellow broadcasters and interviewers and generally people who are far more successful than me. And that list is vast. So that really worked out well for me. But I talked to Renee Paquette a while ago. I had a chance to talk to Athena. So I thought I'd keep the WWE backstage train rolling here from Fox Sports. Fox Sports. I almost said Fox Sports Ohio. I'm a Cincinnati guy. So from Fox Sports, Ryan Satin. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Yes. Fox Sports as a whole, Ryan Satin. It's going fantastic. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I think if you worked for Fox Sports Ohio, that'd be a bit of a demotion at this point.
I mean, I guess at this point, no diss to Fox Sports Ohio whatsoever.
Well, it doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't even, it's Bally Sports now, so it doesn't even exist anymore. So you'd be working for a company that no longer exists.
That would definitely be a huge demotion. Yes. Now that you explained it that way, yes.
Oh man, I've been looking forward to this one for a while. We've been talking back and forth. I'm excited to get to chat with you today. I do want to start there with WWE Backstage because I loved that show. I loved the concept. I thought it was very well executed, and unfortunately, extenuating circumstances being what it was, man, it just didn't work out, which again, everything has to be perfect in broadcasting for things to work out. But do you still think that's a concept that could still work right now? And, you know, maybe there's a thought of a revival, at least some variation of it here in the near future. And if so, where do I send my resume?
Well, there's three questions there. So I know. Send your resume. Well, you have to send it to me, and I'm not going to pass it along because I don't want you to take my job. But yes, I do think that I absolutely think there's still a place for a show like this. I mean, Backstage isn't off of the air because there wasn't a thirst for it or an interest in it. It's off the air because of the pandemic. So, and then that just kind of like snowballed into a million different things or whatever. So yes, absolutely, definitely still think there's a place for a show like WWE Backstage. You know, I'm at Fox Sports still. I'm the lone survivor, I guess. So you know, I
would love for it to happen again. Horror movie. That is what it is. Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Well, no, I'm just the one they leave behind to tell what happened in the last tale, and then I get shoved to the side for the main characters. So so I was like, but yes, I would love it if there were another WWE Backstage incarnation of some sort. You know, I mean, you know, I do a lot of the digital stuff at Fox Sports. I'm not as much involved in the TV side anymore because of WWE Backstage not being around. But I'm dealing with the digital side, and it's definitely something I've talked about. I've pushed for, not Backstage itself, but just like, hey, we should do something like that. And so, you know, I've slowly been doing these Raw and SmackDown recaps. I've integrated those into my podcast roundup just to kind of like, you know, add a little bit more coverage to what I've been doing before. You know, I really like Out of Character, and it's something that I heavily pushed for when I started at Fox Sports, officially, like full time, when I wasn't doing Wrestling Sheet anymore. And so, you know, I pushed for it heavily because I really wanted an interview show, you know, like Backstage-ish, where you could see these wrestlers out of character. I think that even though there was, you know, a little bit of kayfabe involved in WWE Backstage, I think that ultimately it was cool to see some of these people out of character when they were sitting there just kind of talking, like Mark Henry and Keith Lee just talking about the business, or, you know, certain interviews that Renee were doing, was doing. They were cool. They were out of character and stuff. And so I really did want to do a podcast like that when I started. But I also, you know, like you said, someone who works in the, you know, the media coverage business, and I still want to talk about Raw and SmackDown. So I then I pushed for doing the roundups as well. And so it is fun to kind of like get to do coverage while also doing the interviews. And yeah, I would love for one day to kind of like somehow help bring it all back together to do some sort of incarnation of Backstage, where it's another sports roundtable type show.
I love that you're continuing to carry the flag for mainstream coverage for professional wrestling, which is definitely something I want to talk about here with you. But first things first, before we go any further, I do got to thank our friends over at Bet Online. We would not be talking here right now without them. They are the fastest, easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports contests and events with first to market odds and lines. Get reviews, news for every league, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, golf. It's all there. Bet Online continues to be the top online resource for all your sports information, from live in-game betting to props and futures. Go to Bet Online today. Use the mobile device. Sign up. Use our promo code BLEAV50. That is BLEAV50, and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, where the game starts. Talking with Ryan Satin here of Fox Sports, not Fox Sports Ohio. And
nailed that ad read.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You talk about all these different roles and trying to keep everything alive with WWE Backstage. The one thing that you're not doing anymore is what you were brought on WWE Backstage to do, and that was to be that Jay Glazer role, right? Of you're going to break the news of who's got the injuries, who's signing, and I loved it. That was one of the things that kind of like that NFL Today type feel for it, which is what I really loved about that, and is what I wish that they had before, Raw and SmackDown. So I'm not watching Chicago Fire the last 5 minutes of that before Raw comes on, or Jeopardy before SmackDown comes on. I'd love like a half-hour like pregame show kind of thing. But I love that role for you, but you have gotten completely out of covering the news business, which could not have been the worst time to do that, because this has been the most newsworthy year in professional wrestling ever, right? So
I guess, yeah.
Why did you want to get out of doing the news? Because I know you've talked about this on social media before in a little bit, but why was it so important for you to branch out of breaking news and get into doing something else?
Well, I think that like it was a couple different reasons. I think that my ultimate passion, like as a kid, like growing up, even as an adult, like as much as the news was something I did, like my passion was always more of like content creation, and that's not really a word that existed when I was younger, but like really, like when I was growing up, like the thing that I wanted to do was I just wanted to make other people happy. Like I wanted to like help other people who, I was like, I don't know, I was like a sad kid. I was kind of an emo sad kid. And like, I did use television as like an escape, like television was just like always there for me. And then when YouTube came about, like internet, digital kind of stuff, but like watching something like that, and movies too, but like really it was like TV and watching my dad make television and like producing stuff that like makes people forget about whatever they're dealing with, because so much that I watched, pro wrestling especially, helped me escape everything that I was thinking about. I'm someone who like overthinks constantly. I can't help it. And, TV wrestling has always helped me escape from that, and I can just kind of like check out and just lose myself in this thing that's this fantasy world and just have fun. And so, really like my goal in life was to make things that would help give people an escape. That was really my ultimate goal in life. So when I went to TMZ, like I really wanted to be on the show like I did, like it wasn't necessarily about the news. It was about being on the show. And so I started doing, news as a way of getting myself on the show, because I knew that the television show helped people be happy. But then when I started doing the news, I fell in love with it. I was like, man, this is so cool. This is so cool to be at the forefront of something that's factual, that and know about it before everybody else. Let's turn that on mute. Sorry. And just to like know about something before everybody else. It was like a high, like it really was, like there's a high to it where you're like, holy crap, like this is cool. And in a way, like, when I was at TMZ, I wasn't doing that many negative stories. And that's a weird thing to say for someone that worked at TMZ, but like really they were like, Ryan, when I started on the news desk, they were like, find a niche thing, tackle that, and become the best at that, best reporter at that. I was like, well, that's easy. I love wrestling. I've been watching wrestling forever, and I hate I hate the landscape of wrestling news. So you want me to make you want me to take one niche thing and make it more factual? Pro wrestling, And so I started doing that. And, I got hooked on it as well. And then, it was honestly like, I was doing backstage and I was liking it. And I was liking the news thing I was doing. I felt like I was in a good place with everything. I was like, my news coverage was respected. I was getting to do a TV show again, which was satisfying me on another level because it was what I, as a kid, the real goal. Everything was going great to a certain degree. And then, ultimately it was that story I did about Sasha. I didn't even do a story on it. It was my tweet about Sasha Banks and Bayley. I was caught up in the moment, of just doing my thing of like what I thought was something that like just everything else that I had been doing news coverage wise. And I felt confident in what I was reporting about it. But then, I saw that documentary that WWE put out and I saw the way something that I had done, a very simple tweet that I thought in my mind, was no different than Stone Cold walking out or, things like that of the past. CM Punk walking out, which I had reported on. Like I had never, I in my mind, it was like akin to just reporting on those kinds of things, And then when I saw the documentary and I saw how like something that I did affected someone like in such a negative way, that made someone feel the opposite of everything that I had ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
It made me refocus on my whole entire career. Like at that point I was like, is this what I want to do forever? Do I want to reveal people's secrets that they don't want out there forever? Do I want that like on my conscience every day? And it was already weighing on me heavily. And when I saw that, it was like, you know what, dude, I don't. Like, I genuinely don't. I feel awful. I wish I could take it back. I feel terrible. I genuinely like, I wish people understood how bad like I feel about it. It's never what I wanted of my life. And so at that point I was like, you know what? Like, I don't think I want to work in news anymore. I love wrestling. I would love to continue content creation within wrestling. But I don't think I want to like be the guy who reports stuff like this anymore. Like it just didn't bring me joy in life. So I then, at that point, started to pursue Fox Sports more heavily. I was kind of like, hey, can we make this more of a full-time thing where I'm more of an analyst rather than a news person? And, because of their deal, obviously, like they're not looking for someone who's breaking news on, WWE every week anyways. Right. And I had a good relationship with the bosses there. And I was like, this is something I really think I could help bring to you guys, like more coverage, help expand the deal that you guys have with WWE. More interviews with all the wrestlers that are available that just no one's doing because of this, because there's a partnership there, but no one's doing some of these things now. And that's kind of like where it blossomed from, of me being like, rather than being that Jay Glazer, like I would like to be someone who's just kind of like talking about the business instead. And they were like, yeah, we'd love that. And so, since then I've been super happy about it. And similarly, like, when I went to Fox Sports, there was no like edict of like, don't talk about AEW anymore. Like no one said to me, Ryan, you can't talk about AEW. Not one person has ever said that in the 2.5 years I've been
running theory though. Like, don't you hate AEW? That's what Twitter says.
That's what Twitter says. I mean, I broke the news on AEW existing. I went to the first All In. I went to first, I went to all the first shows of AEW. I watch it. Like, I don't understand that running theory because I had a couple critiques when that's what my job was at the time. Right. And I also like some of those critiques that people still are mad about were early in the pandemic, and people in the they don't know that people in the company told me after, like, hey, you know what? That was actually as frustrated as people were about it. Like what you said made sense. And we did take that into account and we did make changes, like having a bunch of older gentlemen in the crowd at the start of the pandemic when we don't know what's going on and we don't want something bad to happen to Jim Ross and Jake the Snake and stuff. And I was like, hey, maybe that's not the safest thing to be doing, and ultimately, things have changed now. And so, but I mean, yeah, the AEW thing, no one ever said, Ryan, don't talk about AEW. It was just, I knew that once I worked at Fox Sports, no matter what I said, if I had a critique, and it's still to this day, I tweet positively about AEW sometimes. But if I had a critique about AEW, they would go insane. If I had one minor critique that I put out there, they would go insane. They'd say, you effing shill. You effing shill. You e-drone, blah, 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 blah. You're getting paid, bootlicker, Vince is at, all that stuff. And no one cares, but when it doesn't matter that I'm a fan. If I have just a minor critique, it doesn't matter. So I knew it would be even worse the second I started working at Fox Sports, because there is a relationship with WWE. So I made the choice to stop talking about AEW publicly, because I didn't want to have to deal with it anymore, because I had already dealt with it the whole time it had been in its existence, and now I wasn't getting paid to deal with that anymore, and so I didn't want to.
Yeah, the tribalism of wrestling fans is probably the most, not probably, it is the most exhausting part about covering pro wrestling, watching pro wrestling. It's like everything has to be a fight, everybody has to make a point, and it's like, just like what you like, and that's it. And if somebody expresses an opinion that you don't agree with, okay, let's have a civil discussion about it. That's perfectly fine. But when you start throwing insults out there and calling people marks and shills and things, like, guys, it's wrestling. It's right. And then it goes like even worse. Like people like Sean Rossap and Denise Salcedo, and the abuse that they get on social media, and the abuse that you've gotten on social media. I'm sitting here going, thank God I only have 2,600 followers. No one knows who the fuck I am, and I am perfectly fine with that. Like, I
also realize, though, dude, honestly, like, I get it a lot less now. And you know why I get it a lot less now? Because I don't argue with as many people anymore. And I have learned, like, it was a collective thing. I had to make it. It was a choice I had to make in my mind of, like, you know what, dude? I bet you if you stop arguing with every single person you disagree with in your replies, less people will start to try to argue with you, because it's like the old bully. I had a older brother, and it's like my older brother. I had to learn one day that whenever he got bored, whenever he came to bother me, if I didn't give in to his picking on me for his enjoyment, he would just leave, and it's just like that on social media. Everyone's like that annoying older brother on social media. And if you don't feed into it, like, they won't argue with you as much. And I fall for the trap. And I'm not saying I don't get mean replies and stuff. But what I'm saying is like, if you argue with people less, it will slow down in your mentions. And I wish I think Sap's still kind of I think a piece of him likes it a little bit. He likes to argue people.
He's spicy. He's
because I used to be that spicy man too. Like, I get it. At a certain point, though, it was like, man, my brain is spiced out. Like, I need a break.
So just kind of diving back into what you were talking about, why you left news, man. And this is why I agree with you. And I'm actually in the news business. Like, my shoot job is at a news talk radio station. I anchor the morning news in Cincinnati, Ohio, 700 WLW, top rated news talk station in the country. Little boast there, but whatever. Shout out. That's where I'm at, right? So I do that. That's like normal, like, everyday kind of news. And it's not really what I'm passionate about, but I'm not really like breaking that kind of news either. And it's like, it's like my anxiety gets the better of me. Like, if I tweet out something, like if I do know something and I'm going to report on something, even if I'm 100% confirmed that I got 4 sources, it's easier to do that in stuff like the NFL or city council or something like that, where things aren't prone to change every last little second. So what you tweet out may be factual at 3:30 on a Thursday, and then by the time 8 o'clock on a Friday rolls around, it doesn't happen. And then all of a sudden you're making shit up, man. That didn't happen, this, that, and the other thing. In a world like professional wrestling, my anxiety would not let me do news. Like, even if I did the due diligence, built the sources, like, case in point, right ahead of SummerSlam in Nashville, I had somebody who was in the know, who tweeted out, who just casually mentioned to me that Pat McAfee was going to have a barbershop chorus for his entrance. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I could report this. I could tweet that out. One, does anybody care? And then two, what happens if it gets cut for time restraints? Because then I look like a total freaking idiot. I wrestled with that for like 4 hours before I finally sent out a tweet. Like 9 people noticed it and no one cared after it was over. So it's like, that's just where my my anxiety is. It's
Oh,
so
bro, I totally get it. I totally get it, dude. Like it's stressful, dude. It's stressful, man. Like when I was at TMZ, at TMZ, I had there was a little bit more anonymity at TMZ, even though I was on the TV show. Like on the TV show, they're not like Ryan broke that story, or so-and-so broke that story or whatever. On the TV show, it just, I'm one of the people just kind of like talking about the videos or whatever. And then on the website, it just says TMZ staff, and so,
yeah.
There was that little bit of level of like, okay, well, ultimately I'm protected here, like I'm protected here. Very rich lawyers here. There's, and they're all telling you what to do. Like, people think that like TMZ is like this run and gun thing, but there's like, 10 lawyers there that you have to run every story by, and, all these checks and balances before it ever makes it to the website. And so, I had all that in place, but I had grown to a level of like, okay, I'm pretty good here. Like I've broken some of the top stories in TMZ history. I managed the weekend for a few years. And at the end of my time there, it was kind of like, I'm really only enjoying doing the wrestling stories here. And they were like, it was kind of like, well, we want more than just wrestling stories from you. And it was like, like give us some Kardashian stuff. And I was like, I'd rather talk about wrestling. And so, ultimately I left and then I started Wrestling Sheet. And when that veil of anonymity gets pulled back, because ultimately that was my reasoning for starting Wrestling Sheet. I had done TMZ for 5 years or whatever, and I ultimately realized that at the end of the day, just like I said, all the stuff I had done there, the managing I had done there, the work on the news desk I had done there, breaking 5 of the top stories in TMZ history, all that kind of stuff, like nobody knew it. I was there and it was like, oh, he's just that dumb guy who likes wrestling on the TV show. No one knew that like I had been doing so much there for so long. They barely even knew my name. So it was like, all right, like let's do this wrestling thing and let's do a wrestling site instead. And shout out to a couple people. Nick Houseman from Wrestling Inc. was someone, he was back at WrestleZone at the time. And when I was just needing that motivation, he hit me up like, hey man, like I was a big fan of what you were doing at TMZ and I hope that you continue your coverage in the wrestling space. Then I got like a news story just for fun about Virgil or something, and I tweeted it, and TMZ put it on their website a few hours later as if it was a story they got. And I was like, I called my old boss there, like, yo, dude, like you guys like we separate, we go our separate ways here. And then you use my stories, like, and one of my bosses who I'm still very tight with to this day, he was like, hey man, like that did suck. They did that. But if you had a website where you had put this on instead of just Twitter, you'd have every right to be like, why didn't you guys credit? You'd have even more right to be like, why didn't you guys credit me? So why don't you make a place where you could put these stories like and still do it? And I was like, yeah, you know what? I will. I will. And so I in secret for a few months did the website. But then when that veil of anonymity got lifted and I started doing it and it was all on me, it was a lot different. It was very stressful. It did weigh heavily on my mental health. It's why I, to this day, at Fox, like I'm not like, I could talk about every single news story. No, there's no edict like don't talk about news stories, Ryan. I would rather cover the actual content on the television shows and analyze that because it's what they wanted of me. Ultimately, like no, I'm not being paid to talk about the news, but there's no thing saying you can't talk about it. I didn't want that to be my life, So I was like, I talked about it for 10 years. The news, I needed a little bit of a break from talking about the news every week, but I'm not against talking about the news now. I think I've had a far enough break between it. It's just it's not really what's being asked of me. So it's nice to kind of like just step away for a little bit.
Yeah. When I asked the question about why you got out of news, I really didn't mean to kind of dive down that rabbit hole and everything like that. Have you had a chance to talk with Bayley and Sasha and kind of bury the hatchet there a little bit?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think they'd want to talk to me. Honestly, like and I get it. Like if I was really mad at someone, I wouldn't want to talk to them either. So I haven't really like had a place to say any of that kind of stuff. Like I don't know. Like I don't know if like I'm a pretty, like I said earlier, I'm a fairly emo person, I guess. And I don't even know how I would really approach that kind of thing. I apologized once on social media, and I don't think it was received very well by everybody, and I've since reflected on that as well. And but I don't really know how I even would approach it, to be honest with you. Like I would love to. I would love to. I don't really think. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, if I saw them in person, I would try to. I just don't know if. Yeah, I don't know I don't know if it'd be accepted. And honestly, like I get it. Like I get it. If I was in their position, I'd probably hate me too. So yeah, I don't know. I wish.
I mean, it is a difficult thing.
Oh, my camera went out. Oops.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, I figured something was going on there.
It turns off every 30 minutes. I don't know.
Oh, it's all right. But yeah, man, it is a difficult thing. And it's like, I think it's an important thing for a lot of people to realize that we all are going to make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. And then if it's, you can learn from those mistakes. And honestly, like I say this kind of proudly, like I am really fucked up in the head. Like I have severe mental health issues, and it's like, it is a constant struggle and a constant battle. Like you talk about Nick Hausman, who I love Nick, even though he thinks my name is Rich. I absolutely love Nick Hausman. He's a really, really good dude. And him kind of helping you along the way. I've had people similar kind of help me along the way and pushing through it, because when you look at it, man, like I started this channel in January. The last thing the world needed was another wrestling podcast channel, right? But this was something that I felt I needed to do, that I needed to try to give it a shot. And I've been doing fairly well. I have a good relationship with WWE that I have spent years building, and I'm working on that with AEW and others. And I wanted a place where I could do my own thing, much like you leaving TMZ and starting up the Wrestling Sheet, right? But it is a grind and it is a slog. And there have been so many times, even over the last like 9 months, where I'm just like, do I want to keep doing this on top of the 2 other jobs that I'm already doing and trying to raise 2 kids, right? And at some point, I got to be a husband too,
and fixing up your house.
And fixing up my house. Yes, there's a lot in my life right now. And, I do keep going because I do enjoy it, but it is a grind and it is a slog, because it is so hard to, get noticed, honestly, because the market is surprisingly heavily saturated for this, right? And it's like you have been one of these guys that has carried the flag for bringing pro wrestling coverage into the mainstream and making sure that it has been done the right way for people like myself, who are going through the grind and going through the slog and constantly questioning themselves about whether or not they're on the right path or they should keep going. Like, what would be your advice to somebody in my shoes or somebody else's shoes who's even considering getting into it, to kind of keep that going and to push through and, try to find a way to break into that, to break out of the mold, because there is so much out there right now?
Well, first of all, it's super kind of you to say some of that stuff. I appreciate it very much. And about, mainstream and all that kind of stuff and being a good positive thing. I appreciate it. To answer your question, I think you were kind of there already. It's like, if it's something that you feel passionate about, if it's something that you feel like will bring you some sort of completion, like I think that's the reason to really be doing it. If you think you can bring something different to the table, then I think it's totally worth doing. I think in 2022, it's a lot different than 5-10 years ago. Like you can have a small audience. It was, like Twitch, for example, right? You can have like, they kind of explained it to me, and they said something to me that made me think about things in a different way recently when I was talking to them. They said, like, you might not think that, like, if you're doing a stream and let's say there's 50 people watching live. Like, you might not think in your mind, you go, oh, there's only 50 people watching live.
Sure.
But if you were throwing a party and 50 people were there, you know how pumped you'd be to have a party with 50 people? Like, that's awesome. That'd be sick, you know? And I realized that you might not be able to make a career out of throwing parties with 50 people every week, but think how much fun you'd be having. And if you could have enough fun to feel better about things and to be able to bring something different and provide entertainment for people, and that's ultimately what you're trying to do with like a show like this. So I think for you, like, it is, you know, and others, like, you got to keep pushing through, you know, like I have had, you talked about me at mainstream places. I've had pushback every single place I've gone.
I believe it.
About wrestling, you know, like every single place I've gone, they're like, meh, 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 you know, every single place. When I was at TMZ, that conversation where they said, find a niche thing. And I said, oh, wrestling. I didn't tell you that their answer to me was maybe try something else. You know, like I don't say that part of the story when I'm trying to give motivation to people, but it was like, maybe something else besides wrestling. And I was like, no, wrestling. Like, I'm telling you guys, wrestling, you know? And they were like, people don't care about wrestling, Ryan. And I was like, yes, they do. So you
don't. Big difference.
You don't, but I know that they do, because I know that I've been on wrestling internet for a decade, and there's a bajillion wrestling sites with 100 fake news stories on them. Like, I know that there is a thirst for this kind of thing. And I'll never forget, like, I finally got a sad death-related wrestling story on the site. And the way TMZ worked back then was like, there was a TV up in the newsroom, and other newsrooms have this method as well. And it drives the news desk. It pushes them to get better news stories than their coworkers, because there's a TV in the newsroom, and it has all the stories that are on the front page listed, or just it has the top 10 traffic stories of the moment, you know, and it refreshes every couple minutes, right? And so you'd see where your story was throughout the day, how well it did, your stories, plural, whatever.
Right.
You'd see how they were doing, right? And you'd see if in the past couple minutes it went down, it went up. And I'll never forget, like, I pushed for this wrestling story, and they were like, no one cares. And I was like, just come on, just give me this one. You know,
one shot.
Like,
give me one damn shot.
Just give me this. It was like, because the way it would work, you know, we'd publish some stuff overnight. So it was like, this is going to go up overnight. You know, just give me the rest. It's the last article, the last auto published at the bottom of the barrel, you know, like, come on. Okay. And it was at the top of the board all day. Like, because every wrestling site picked it up, and every wrestling site was talking about it. WrestleZones, wrestling, you know, they all picked it up. And it was above the Kardashian stories. It was above all these like A-listers. This story stayed at the top all day, got tons of traffic. And they were like, all right, well, maybe you could give us some more of those wrestling stories, you know?
Meanwhile, Ryan Satin walks into work the next day with his chest puffed out, just strutting on into the office like, huh.
That happened plenty of time where I was like, guys, this is a huge story. And they were like, oh, it's not going to be in Us Weekly. And I'd be like, yeah, I know. It's going to be on every wrestling site, and it'll do huge. Or like, guys, I know it'll be on BuzzFeed, and it'll do 10 times better than Us Weekly, you know, or like, because it was not, you know, non-wrestling stuff like that. And, you know, like when I did a story on Keenan and Kel, and how I interviewed Kel on the record. He's sitting here telling me that like things are not good between him and Keenan, and that Keenan like doesn't want to talk to him anymore. And I'm like, what? Keenan and Kel don't talk? And I like, this is lead story tomorrow. And being told, no one cares about that. And I'm like, what?
Are you kidding?
What do you mean?
Everybody who was my age, their heart broke when that.
Yeah. And I was like, what do you mean, guys? This is literally going to be the biggest thing on the internet. Well, I don't think anyone's going to care about that. That one was one of my bosses stood up for me and was like, Ryan's right. This is the lead story. And they were like, okay. And then, yeah, that was another walk back into work the next day. But yes, so to answer your question, it's like, it's persistence, dude. Like, it's what you believe in. If like, what, you know, it's one of the things I try to explore as much as possible on my own show on Out of Character is like talking to these wrestlers about like when they decided to bet on themselves. Because I do like to find out, like, you know, when people were like, you know what? No, I believe in this, And for me, like even with my show, like, I had to push for my show. Like when I got there at Fox, it wasn't like, we're hiring you to do a podcast. It was like, we're hiring you, you figure out what you're doing. And it was like,
Wow.
Well, man, like, I was like, there was just, to me, I had been, I did my website for 5 years or whatever it was. And the whole time, like I was the main person writing every article on the website. And I had other people that helped me along the way, but I wrote, let's say 95% of the articles, and I edited the other 5%. So like I did every article for the website, and I was reading every interview that everybody was doing with wrestlers. I read them for 5 years, and I was like, and I'd just sit there and I'd go, this is what you talk to this person about when you get a chance to talk to them. Like, you're going to ask them what everybody else has asked them. Like, you're going to ask the same questions every single person. You're going to ask, The Miz about this. Like, he's done a million interviews. You're going to ask, you don't do a little bit of Googling first to make sure that he hasn't talked about this 500,000 times.
Dude, I'm with you, man. Like, literally every interview that I do, man. Like, I talked to Shayna Baszler today. You know what I did before I did that interview with Shayna Baszler? I watched Shayna Baszler's interview with Ryan Satin on Out of Character. That's exactly. I watched all 53 minutes of it.
Did you like it?
I did. Yes.
Okay,
yes,
good.
It was fun. Yes, I do. I really do enjoy your work, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm not just blowing smoke, right? I genuinely do. I pass out a lot of compliments, but I mean them all. I genuinely do. I'm not an ass kisser.
I appreciate it. No, that was a fun conversation for me too. That was a fun one because it's someone who I like knew in person.
Yeah, and she is a blast. It's the first time I've ever gotten a chance to talk with her, and it was great. But like even when I did my conversation with Athena, at that point she had done like 5 or 6 interviews, and none of them had really blown up. But man, like, okay, so what can I ask differently? And I know that my audience probably hasn't watched. Maybe they watched some of theirs, and you're going to always have some crossover. But man, I really dove in and I tried to ask out of the box different stuff that other people haven't covered. And and that's part of the thing that I like about the position that I'm in. And I don't like you get like you and Ariel Helwani and Renee Paquette, you guys are like the first ones out of the block, right? So I know you guys do your research and you get to add, but you guys get the first crack at it. So when I'm like the 10th or 11th or 12th person to interview somebody, it really does make me hone my skills as far as doing research and asking questions that haven't been come up with. And I know you have been in a similar situation and probably coming up and doing and getting to the point where you're at right now.
Well, yeah, I'm third of those people, so I also have to still do that. So, so I also still have to do that. Yeah, totally. And so, yeah, but I think it's fun, like, to me, I really, with my show, I didn't know how like inside I could get with like behind the scenes. So I was like, when I realized, I was like, like the shows that I listen to, the podcasts that I listen to are like, Mark interview wise are like Mark Maron and Conan O'Brien. There's like this Happy, Sad, Confused podcast. And I was like, like, besides Happy, Sad, Confused, like Conan and Mark Maron, they're not really getting like too behind the scenes with people. They're instead like trying to pull out who the person is, like to give a glimpse of like what it would be like to hang out with this person. And, I started to think, I was like, what, the behind the scenes is fun, it's fine. I like hearing the behind the scenes stuff, but I would like to know what it would be like to hang out with this person, and so I really do like try to get to the essence of like what it would be like to hang out with this person, and that's why I ask like just random stuff that has nothing to do with wrestling or whatever. And it's nice because there was literally, similarly with the podcast, it was like there has never been one edict of like you have to ask this kind of stuff or that kind of stuff. It was literally just like, here you go, and obviously I had producers who helped me afterwards, and the stuff would cut sometimes or whatever, or they're like, maybe that was a little too weird, maybe no, or whatever. But ultimately at the end of the day, like I think it's important for interviewers to do that research to try to make it a little bit different, because it's so boring listening to an interview where you just hear the person talking about something they've talked about 500 times. And you're like, man, like you have Seth Rollins for 45 minutes and you like ask him something that he's literally done a whole interview already about, so that his fan base has no interest in this because they've already seen them talk about all these things, you know? So yeah, no, I'm with you on that, dude. The research is so key to me. I think the research is so important when you're doing interviews.
Yeah, 45 minutes with Seth Rollins. I'd kill 45 minutes with literally anybody.
Sorry, I should have told it 20 minutes. Sorry, 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Yes, I have gotten to go 20 minutes with somebody before. Yes,
dude, you don't know though. Okay, I'll be honest though, dude. So I was doing the 20-minute interviews, right? And I was like, 15-minute, 20-minute interviews with all the WWE people, and then I was like, well, can't we just turn these into a podcast? You know, and then it was like, well, that's a little bit more of like a discussion, you know, thing, blah, blah, right? So then when it got there, it was like, okay, yeah. And I said, like, well, can they be 45 minutes? Because I was like, oh, the podcasts I listen to, they're all 45 minutes, you know, and they were like, yeah, totally. Then I got the approval for that, and it was like, cool. And then it was like, shit, I gotta talk for 45 minutes now, you know. So because you underestimate how long 45 minutes is when you're leading the conversation. You know, I know we've been talking for a while here, but when you really want to get like, we're talking shop, like you said, when you really want to get like deep in the weeds with someone on certain stuff, and like it's like 45 minutes is longer than you think, because when you get to like 30 minutes and you look at your notes and you're like, especially I'm a talker, I'm gonna make it easy to talk for 45 minutes.
Sure, yeah,
but there are some people who are like, yeah, totally. And you're like, oh, fuck. I got 45 more minutes. And that person just said, one sentence answer. Okay, cool. We're doing this. All right. Like, all right.
Also, when you are an interview like that and you do get somebody who's giving you short answers, right? Like, I think it's then on, like you said, to kind of carry the conversation a little bit. And also, I think, you know, be entertaining, be loose, be funny a little bit, and kind of break them out of their shell. I remember an interview that I did with Shotzi, where I ran through like 6 questions in 2 minutes, and I'm going, oh no, oh God, how am I going to stretch this to 15? Right? Like that's what I was worried about. But then I don't know, like I started cracking some jokes, and that was something I did a long time ago. And that was kind of like a turning point for me as far as my interview philosophy was going. It's like, all right, why don't you put a little bit more of your personality in there? And because you know those 20-minute interviews that you get, you know, you got to talk about the pay-per-view or the documentary or whatever it is. So, okay, there's about 5 questions that you got to ask.
Yeah, and you get this like tiny little part of like real personality in there of like, okay, these are the questions I want to talk about.
Right. And if you're interviewing Drew McIntyre, you maybe get one of those questions because the guy loves to talk, which is great. But at the same time, it's like, all right, cool. I got 10 things that I want to ask you. What's the best one? All right, Len, you know, and then, you know, squeeze it in.
Well, that's why in my notes, I literally, like when I have my podcast notes, I've got like, I have it like sectioned off, you know, and it's like, if I fear that it's going to be one of those people, it's like, all right, let's put these fun questions up here first to like break them out of their shell a little bit. Because I do ultimately think that like, especially in a 45-minute interview, because like you said, 20-minute is a little bit more like you have to hit certain things. You have to, especially when you're working for a publication, like you want to make sure that you have the content for a pay-per-view that's coming up or whatever that's being promoted or whatever. So you have this tiny little bit of like a real conversation. But I do think that in a 45-minute conversation, it's much more of a psychology thing, you know, of like, how can I maximize this conversation? And I think that sometimes like you do, like me personally, at least, like I do look at it as like a little bit of a psychology game of like, okay, you know, you're going to put like some of these fun questions right before the question that you know is going to be the most newsworthy.
Oh yeah. Totally.
So that like they're like in this good mood, you know, and then all of a sudden you're like, so tell us about this behind the scenes thing.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh yeah, and they're all loose already at that point. Exactly. So they just start telling it, and you're like, yes, all right. We did.
If I can make them smile, I got them. If I can make them laugh, they're mine. Right? Like that's my whole philosophy. Is like, I'm in, I got them. I remember doing 20 minutes with Robert Roode, and that son of a bitch never smiled, not once. I couldn't.
The worst. Oh, the worst.
I'm cracking what I thought were really good jokes, but then again, he hangs out with Dolph Ziggler a lot, so he's probably, you know, used to people who think they're funny.
I did an episode with someone who didn't like me, and I had to figure it out during the interview, and I was like, "Oh, this sucks."
Oh no! All right, I won't dive into the behind the scenes question on that one. I won't. Maybe after. But like, So you really do have like the dream job for a lot of people who get into this like I do. Did you think that this would ever be kind of a possibility, right? Like we talk about pushing the mainstream. I have coworkers to this day inside the newsroom who like make fun of me. Not because I cover pro wrestling, not because that I use vacation days to go to SummerSlam and WrestleMania and work, right? But just for watching the damn thing. I'm like, motherfucker, you watch The Bachelor. Like, do you realize some of the shit that you watch? Let me enjoy what I want to enjoy, right?
Yeah,
like, it is a constant struggle to fight for that just acceptance almost. So, like, I do feel like the wrestling industry as a whole is in a lot better place than it once was. It definitely could get better. But I mean, did you ever think that we would at least get to this point where places like Fox Sports is sending you out there and covering all these mainstream events and WrestleManias, and you're getting to talk to Snoop Dogg on the red carpet for crying out loud at SoFi Stadium, you know, and things like that? Like, did you ever think that you would kind of get here to this point?
I don't know if I did, to be completely honest with you. I think there was a certain point at Wrestling Sheet where I didn't think it was going to be possible anymore, but I'm so glad that I've been able to kind of like turn things around and make it happen. You know, I think that when I was at TMZ, I did think it was more possible because I was a little bit more confident in everything, where I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And I was going to make stuff happen, you know? And so I was making stuff happen at TMZ, and I had Pro Wrestling Sheet afterwards, but I don't think that I thought that the Fox Sports thing, I'd ever get to like this mainstream of a platform to cover pro wrestling. And even furthermore, like to go backstage at SummerSlam and do post-match interviews. I was literally standing beside like their interviewers in a row, like me and Sarah Schreiber, and then she goes up and does her interview, and then I go up next. And no, I never would have thought that were possible. I've really been trying to remind myself of that lately, because, you know, it is easy with mental health and stuff like that to feel like I'm doing so much, or I'm still hustling, or I'm still grinding. But like, if I were to look back at 5 years from now and like talk to myself 5 years ago, he would like slap me in the face for any of these stresses that I have. He'd be like, just like, you're backstage at SummerSlam interviewing every wrestler with a dream job. Shut up, you know, like he'd be so mad at me, you know. So yes, like total. Yeah, I would not thought I would be here, and I am incredibly grateful to have this dream job. Like, you know, I think that's part of what gives me that imposter syndrome every day, is that like, and I try to fight through it. I think that's one of those things that a lot of people struggle with in whatever field they're in, is that imposter syndrome thing. And I do think it's because I am living a dream job. Like, I'm getting paid to watch wrestling, to interview wrestlers, to where, you know, most people go like, oh, my shoot job this or my shoot job that, when they're covering wrestling. And like, this is my job. It's been my job for 10 years, like only covering wrestling. And it's really cool. It really makes me happy. It is something that, like, you know, when I left TMZ, I really badly wanted to work in the wrestling business in some capacity. Like, I really did. It was like, you know what, I really want to do that. And prior to TMZ, I just enjoyed watching wrestling. Like, genuinely, wrestling has always been my escape, like, for so long. I didn't even talk about being a wrestling fan for a really long time. I didn't tell people I watch wrestling for the reasons that you just said. It'd be like, well, why do you watch wrestling? And I didn't feel like
explaining. You know it's fake, right?
And I'd be like, I'd love, my favorite thing when they'd be like, oh, you know it's fake. And I'd be like, no, pretty sure it's real. And they'd be like, no, it's not. I'd be like, I watched The Undertaker die multiple times. I'm very aware that it's real. And they're like, whoa, they get all mad. It's my favorite. I'd always mess with people, but you can't tell from my online persona that I like to mess with people, right?
No, not at
all. Yeah, so I think that, dude, like, it, like, ultimately, like, no, I never would have thought I'd get to this point, because, like, I didn't even think what I'm doing was possible, like, for someone. Because even when I started at Fox, like, a lot of these things that I've done have all been just me being like, hey, what if we just do this? And they'd be like, well, I don't know about that. And I'd be like, no, we should try. And they'd be like, okay, you know, and then they'd like give me the opportunity to do it, you know, whether it's the platform that I kind of like do reactions at pay-per-views during, where I've had some funny moments where surprise returns have happened, and then they liked it, or some of the podcast, or doing the backstage interviews. Like, it's all been a process. It's all been me being like, hey, do you think we can do this? Like, none of this stuff ever gets handed to me. It's always me being like, hey, and then working for it. Even you talked earlier about and we were talking about pushing through and being persistent. A year ago when I started doing the show, or a little bit over a year ago when I started doing the podcast, nobody cared. People didn't care as much about TikTok and Reels and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I saw the power of TikTok because my fiance posted a video on there and it got millions of views. And I was like, what's this thing? Now she's got 50,000 followers on this random platform. Like, what is this? I'm going to start doing this, if this is going to connect me to other wrestling fans, I should be doing it. And I did it for a year without seeing like a ton of growth from it. But after a year of posting these reels and sharing the stories that I've been sharing on social media, dude, in this second year of the show, I have the wrestlers being like, oh, dude, like, I saw the reel you posted on this. Like, oh man, I've been waiting for you to ask me on the show. I've been wondering when you were going to finally bring me on. Like, oh, I loved this conversation you had with so-and-so. And I'm like, wait, the wrestlers are listening to this show? That's cool. That's like ultimately what I wanted. I said at the beginning, I really wanted to entertain people and give people an escape. And if it's like the direct market of people that like I'm interviewing, that's even cooler, that I'm giving those people an outlet to just kind of like unwind. I've had people that started in the company that reached out to me that were like, dude, I've learned about my coworkers through listening to your show. And then we like talk about it at work. And so that stuff's so cool to me. And so like, dude, like, I think persistence is important. I got a little off track there, but I think it's all the persistence and stuff is important. And I did not think I would ever get to this position.
I was going to say, dude, all my interviews go off the rails, so don't worry about
but
it.
I finally got back to where I was at. Yes, I do think it's a dream job. I recognize that it's a dream job, and I try every day to work harder than anybody else would in this position in order to keep it.
I don't think there is anything that is more cool and also simultaneously horrifying than the wrestlers read or watch your work, right? Because like when I got into the wrestling business, it was like it was 2019, Royal Rumble 2019 was the first time we did. We actually talked my bosses into the radio station about doing just a sports talk show, but about professional wrestling. Like, they actually decided to let us do it. And, it was great. Didn't know nearly as much about professional wrestling as I thought I did, which was fine because Jimmy Yang, who lived in Cincinnati, heard me and like contacted me after I interviewed him one time. And he was like, you don't know shit about wrestling, but I want to teach you about wrestling. So come out to my school. And I ended up training with him for 18 months, and that experience was, invaluable.
That's so cool. He's the best. I love him so much.
Right. He's really, really cool. He's really, really great. His daughter's awesome too. I think she's going to do big things in the business. And I'm rooting for her. I can't wait for her to be the first person that I've actually locked up with that gets signed to WWE. Right? Like, I want that to actually happen one day.
Totally.
so badly. And again, that goes back to Jimmy listening and wanting to help, right?
Yes.
But like, until then, it like never crossed my mind that these people would be listening to what I was saying or reading what I was writing. And fast forward to when I started working for another outlet that I recently just left. I remember being at the SummerSlam press junket in 2020. What year is it? 2021. And Sheamus comes up to me and he's like, oh, you work there, huh? Let's see. Who wrote the last article about me? And my immediate response was, it wasn't me. If you got beef, I'm sorry. I don't know who it was. I'm on the video team, completely separate. Please don't hit me. Like, that was my initial response. So it's like, these people will pay attention and they will listen, which is cool. But at the same time, it can be frightening as hell.
I mean, try walking backstage to do interviews at WWE when you were that guy for a time that people didn't like, and being like, oh man, I hope I don't get punched back here, or like tackled into a back room and waterboarded. But it's always, dude, but it's the best. Like, everyone's very supportive, and I do think that I've shown over time that I recognize that as well, because I do think there was a time when I was a little more I had a chip on my shoulder when I left TMZ, and it was like, nobody knows who I was at TMZ. I need to make everyone know who I am.
Yeah.
And I fell into that trap. I think that it's really easy to fall into that trap of social media where you realize that, like, if you're criticizing something in a funny way, but even if you're being really mean, people are going to like, yeah, I agree. Because I mean, like, it is a mean place, Twitter, and I think that, like, it's really easy for you to forget that these words that you're saying that might be kind of mean, the person can read these things. Not only can, most likely will read these things if it blows up, And I think that when you're at, let's say 500 at most, 50, 500,000, it is so followers. It is so easy. Well, no one's reading this, no one's reading this. Oops. And then let's come back on. No one's reading this, and then when those tweets blow up or whatever, it empowers you almost. You're like, oh, I need to feed the machine with more of this because this is what the machine wants. And you get more followers, things move up, the people are agreeing with you. You're like, and then you go like, well, this is just normal. This is what everyone's doing on here. And you're tweeting things that you would never say in person to anyone's face. But you think, well, the machine loves this is what everyone else is doing,
right?
And this is what happens. And it's easy to do it. I did it for a while, and I ultimately, like you said, once I got to a certain level, it was like, and people, I not only were not just seeing it, but saying something to me and disliking me in the real world when I'd see them. It was like, oh, I don't want that to be me. Like, I would never say those things. Like, why do I even care? I don't care what you say, like what you do. Like, I had this like social justice warrior like tag for a long time. And I ultimately realized, like, you know what, dude, like, that's not me in real life. Like, I don't care. You know what? I let it become me in real life rather than being my true self. And like, I was like, you know what, dude, people can say whatever, like, whatever, dude. Like, I'm not anyone's police. I'm not policing anyone, say what you want to say. Like, do I think you're a piece of shit if you make like transphobic, homosexual, like jokes and stuff like that? Yeah. I think you're a piece of shit. Do I think like, like if you're making inappropriate jokes, am I going to judge you? Yeah. I'm fucking really judging you hardcore, dude. You suck. And if I ever see you in person, don't talk to me. But I'm not going to be the one out there like policing these people on social media anymore. Like, it's like ultimately I had to realize, like what you said, of like compartmentalizing things and realizing like what you do and don't need to do. And
there are so many times where it's like, man, because when you're still at that level where you don't have that huge of a following, which by the way, you can follow me on Twitter at Rick Ucchino. When you don't have that huge of a following, like you tend to notice like the little things, like when your follower count goes down, and like.
You notice that when you have a lot of followers too, by the way.
Okay, well, okay, but that never goes away. But man, it's like you try so hard to earn these people, and like occasionally, like somebody like you've interviewed will follow you, and it's like the greatest thing ever. And then like you notice like somewhere down the line, like 6 months, they've unfollowed you, and it's like, well, what the fuck did I do wrong? Like, what? I don't even tweet out negative things. I'm like, does this person hate me now? Like, that's like, and then they don't, because you interview them later in person again, and it's like, they probably don't even remember why they unfollowed you, and I would never ask them in person because who cares? Twitter's not real, and that's the thing that I have to remember, and it's such a negative place already that I will type out something that is a criticism, and I will reword it several times, and more often than not, I end up deleting it because, like, no, I'm going to focus on the positives, and I'm going to cheer people who are doing a hell of a job. And if I do tweet out a criticism, more often than not, it's about a character and their direction and storylines and not the person themselves. And that's the philosophy I take with social media. And unfortunately, that's why I don't have a big following, because negativity is what sells.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to your point before that, there's sometimes when some people have followed me on social media where it suddenly becomes like a second guess myself before every tweet now, because I'm like, oh man, do I want so-and-so to see me saying that?
Right?
Do they will they think I'm a dork if I'm tweeting that? So I completely understand. And there's some where I check every once in a while where I'm like, God, I hope they didn't unfollow me. I hope they didn't unfollow me at this point. There's one who's not even wrestling where I'm just like, if they ever unfollow me one day, it's a very famous person. And I'm like, if they ever unfollow me one day,
I'm deleting Twitter. It's over.
Yeah, it's going to crush my entire existence. And I'm pretty sure they've muted me at this point because they know that if they do that, it'll crush my existence. But then there are sometimes, like once a year, where the person does like one of my tweets and I'm like, did they not mute me? And they're just not on Twitter a lot? I don't know. Don't want to find out. Not going to bring it up.
I can't.
Who they are.
And that's the other thing is like with Twitter, it's like I can't imagine how many like notifications these people get when you do reach to a certain thing. It's like, how do you see literally anything?
You turn your notifications off.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
That's
like
the only way.
Right. So you turn your notifications off. But again, like, how do you notice anything or see anything amongst the sea of shit that gets sent your way? So if somebody does retweet like an interview that I did, I'm like, oh, thank God they saw that. Right. Like, you know,
well, you can like, do you ever on Twitter? This is a secret for everybody who's wondering exactly what you're saying there.
Is this one of those fancy verified only things? Because Twitter won't verify me. I hate that.
It might be. Okay, so go to your reply. If you go to your replies, right, and you click that little wheel, right, and then you go to filters, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then you go to muted notifications. You can click this button right there at the top of you don't follow. And so it'll only show in your replies the people that you follow.
Oh.
So that's how most of them do it. I got taught that by someone once, and I was like, whoa, that's really good. I think that's everybody can do that, where you can change your settings.
I totally could. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think like that's how I think from what I've been, that was passed down to me. So I'm assuming it's passed on to others of how you can like only see who you follow. And that way, because that would mean I'd get lost in the replies. I'd get like, there'd be like a million and they're like, I just want to see my friends. I just want to see what my friends said to me and interacted with me on here doing. And that was how I figured. That's how I figured it out.
Yeah, but, and here's the thing: is like my following constantly goes up and constantly goes down because like I double dip and I'm all over the place. So like I cover the Cincinnati Bengals for SiriusXM. So during football season, I'll gain followers and I'll lose followers. And then when I tweet about wrestling, I'll gain followers and I'll lose followers because it's like, wait, we followed him for this and not this. And it's like, again, Twitter's not a real place. You can't take everything personally. All right, if somebody unfollows me, I don't care. I might care for about 15 minutes.
You care a little bit. You care. I was gonna say you care a little bit.
I care a little bit. Like it just happened to me last week that I noticed somebody that is a prominent star, and I'm like, damn it, that one hurts. But again,
I think there should be I've said this before on Twitter. I think there should be a national holiday on a national Twitter holiday where you're allowed to unfollow like 3 people, and if you get unfollowed by someone prominent on that day, you have to just not take offense to it. You just have it's just like a unfollow free day where like, because there are times where I'm like, God, this person's so negative. Like, I don't want to see these negative tweets in my feed every day. Right. But I know if I unfollow them, it will crush them because I know what that's like. And so I get in this weird like conundrum where I'm like, great, guess I'm just gonna have all this angry messages in these angry tweets all the time in my feed.
And that's why I prefer the mute button, right? Like I like to support people and I'd like to still be able to, DM and things like that. But if there is somebody that I do genuinely like, but I don't necessarily like their Twitter activity, okay, I'll still support you, I'll still follow you, but I just don't want to see your stuff unless I feel like going and looking for it. And that's why I love the mute button. Ryan, this has been a blast. I got a billion other things I wanted to ask you, but I've already kept you well over an hour at this point. Man, for those who don't know, and if they're watching this show, they obviously do. But anyway, where can they follow you? Where can they find your stuff? And what do you got coming up? Because I know you were in LA. I know you got to do a lot of cool shit.
Yes, at Ryan Satin's where you can follow me on social media, but where I would really like you to follow me is the podcast feeds, Out of Character with Ryan Satin, on whatever podcast platform you listen on. This week's interviews with Big E, next week's Finn Balor, the week after that is Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch, not together, separately, but same episode. Yeah, you can follow me on whatever platform, podcast platform you listen on there. We're also on YouTube, so you can watch those shows on YouTube as well. That's the WWE on Fox YouTube channel. There's also clips from Raw and SmackDown, a bunch of other stuff there as well. So make sure you're subscribed to the WWE on Fox YouTube channel. I'm also on Twitch. You can find me there. I'm Ryan Satin Streams. I watch really old wrestling content and talk about it with everybody. But people ask me about the current stuff while we're watching it. It's just a fun party where we're watching random wrestling that you've probably never seen before. We're not watching old WWF. We're watching like Titanus and El Ring from South America.
Yeah, I've seen you tweet that stuff out, and I'm like, what on God's green earth is this? I've never heard of this. I don't know what this is.
It's a show from South America, dude. It's from South America. It started in the 70s and it's on again now, but it's had different iterations over the years. But if you watch it, it was so far ahead of its time. Like, this is before WrestleMania, and they've got all these like goofy characters, music entrances, special effects, all this stuff years before it happened in WWE. It's all in Spanish, yes, but it's crazy to see how far ahead of its time this promotion was. There's a mummy character, there's spacemen, there's creature from the Black Lagoon, Voltron. The Voltron is one of the characters in the promotion because they had like a sponsorship deal for toys. So that's fun. We watch a lot of that, but also we're watching stuff like Southeastern Championship Wrestling and California Championship Wrestling from the early 80s and stuff where you're like, this is a lot of wrestling, and also stuff from the 50s. Like, I went back to Black and White too and was like going back to watching Gorgeous George and Bull Curry and all these guys you've heard the names, Luthez, all that kind of stuff too. So it's super fun to just kind of like watch these people whose names you've heard a million times, but you've never watched, like Seaman Art Thomas, real name of a wrestler. Now he's referred to as Sailor Art Thomas, but in the 50s he was Seaman Art Thomas. And it's the funniest thing when he comes out. They're like, the Seaman coming to the ring, and you're like, whoa, it's great. Yeah, it's great.
I'm sorry. When I hear that, all I think about is that South Park episode where they spoofed.
It's just like that, but it's from the 50s, and it's his actual name. Like, when they said it, I was like, are they calling this guy Seaman? Like, what? Like, it's the funniest thing, dude. And he's in the WWE Hall of Fame, but it says Sailor Art Thomas. And in later years, he became Sailor Art Thomas.
That boils down to a very smart marketing decision. That's exactly what that was.
Or maybe not. He could have had a good niche going on there. He could have sold some good T-shirts there. Seaman. And then on the back, Art Thomas.
It's Seaman.
Oh, yeah. So that's where you can find me doing weird stuff. And Rick, I really appreciate you having me on here. I'm glad we finally got to do this. It was a fun conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully we get to meet in person someday, which is weird that we haven't, considering we've covered like 6 events together. So eventually we'll run into each other and we'll grab a drink or something. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in here today. If you enjoyed what you see, pound the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please hammer that subscribe button as well. Got a lot of cool stuff coming out here soon, ahead of All Out, possibly after All Out, and Clash at the Castle as well. Thank you guys so much. You have been listening to or watching a very special edition of the Bleav in Pro Wrestling podcast, brought to you by Bet Online.